think a lot of people probably wouldn't have a problem with if it was this textbook, although I don't think it would be a textbook because textbooks are boring as hell.
Monday morning, time to work out.
That was a good workout of my arms, and everyone actually showed up this morning, which is unusual.
We wanted to take a minute and talk about our views on kids and watching movies and appropriateness. And it's come up really recently because our family watched all of Game of Thrones together, from our 3-year-old to our now 18-year-old. We recently made a video about it, and it got quite a bit of negative feedback, or at least questioning. So we thought we would share our perspective of why we did this.
I think it's creepy that not only are the parents letting their children watch GOT, but encouraging it, especially as they had watched it before and knew how much sex, violence, and graphic torture is in it. I started watching it as an adult, and I do really enjoy the show, but really not appropriate for children, especially since you said in a recent video you let your 3-year-old watch it. I think there are many more programs to watch as a family which evoke strong emotions and have interesting topics to discuss without being as extreme as GOT.
It's really fascinating to me. Here's this person that agrees that the show is good, at least they watched it, but there is this assumption, I think, made of what is appropriate and what appropriate even means, or age appropriate. Now, I don't find that label of appropriate or that phrase very helpful when we're making decisions for our kids or our family about most any activity, not even movies. One example that we had to face a lot was when we did the Appalachian Trail with our kids. A lot of people said that's not age appropriate.
The appropriate question is assuming that there's a blanket appropriateness for all of society for children, which I guess maybe there is, but we're not subscribing to that necessarily.
Yeah, there is like a thing that society agrees on. It's funny, I was looking at like how different countries rate Game of Thrones, and it's like 18 plus for a lot of countries, then some have 16, some have 15. Then you got like the France and Germany's that like say it's okay for 12-year-olds to watch. I think this kind of shows like there's not an exact age where it's appropriate, but I'll tell you what is helpful for us to ask instead of just is it appropriate, is what are the benefits and what are the potential consequences that could come from doing this type of activity together. So we have kids ranging in age from 3 to 18. And honestly, based upon my perspective of morality, there was a time period when I didn't think Game of Thrones was appropriate for anyone. And I've heard some religious people say this. They call it pornographic, or some kind of like phrase that has a morally loaded term in it that kind of means like it's almost not fit for human consumption at all. We've kind of walked away from some of the like morality, like heaviness that comes with just judging art as either intrinsically good or intrinsically bad. And I think the question we're asking is like, what are the effects on our lives? And what are the effects on our kids' lives? The first question we ask is it harmful? Whether like what kind of media or what kind of stuff is harmful to our kids. The way that I gauge it, and I just wrote down some questions so you can chime in, is one, do the kids want to watch it? Like it's their choice. So even if it's kind of like harmful, that's kind of the most important gauge for them. Like I don't want to force them to watch something that they ultimately decide not to. Also, if they think that they're ready for it, kind of my philosophy is, well, give it a shot. Unless it's like life or death, I'm not gonna stop you from it.
I think it's a big difference to us too if they're experiencing this with us, so that we could help guide them through it. To me, Game of Thrones is a depiction of a lot of history. It's kind of funny to me. I think a lot of people probably wouldn't have a problem with if it was this textbook, although I don't think it would be a textbook because textbooks are boring as hell. But if it was like a history book talking about the medieval times, and let's say there was some, like it's actually somewhat realistic, where there was sex and violence and pretty horrible things, I think, that went on back in that time.
Torture.
And if you handed it to your homeschool kid, I'll just say that because that's our experience, and you're just like, hey, I want you to read this, this will help. I think a lot of people wouldn't have as much of an issue with that. For some reason, I think it's because it's not in that category.
It's fictional.
It's fictional, and maybe they have a problem with like the visual. It's like, oh, that's too much for kids because it's visual and it's not like reading words on a page. Because reading words on a page, you actually then at that point, your imagination can just go wild and like just run with it. Probably even more so than what's depicted on the screen with Game of Thrones.
Which one example of giving our kids the choice is Rainier, who was watching it when he was, I think, even two or three. He said that the White Walkers, who are these like zombie-like characters, were scary to him, and he didn't want to watch them. So every time they came on the screen, we closed his eyes. It worked out really well because he made that decision himself. And even if he wouldn't have, we may have helped him, because another thing that I gauge as probably harmful for my kids is, are they disturbed long-term in a way they're not able to recover from? So are they having nightmares, or are they like afraid of the dark because they're keep on thinking about these images? Or does the kind of like terror, because I'm fine with experiencing terror in a movie scene that's like supposed to be a part of the experience.
Like Jurassic Park, for example.
Yeah, but if you walk away afraid to go outside because of dinosaurs, then I would say they're probably not developmentally able to handle that kind of stimulus. We didn't see that with our kids. Like, we didn't see them afraid or staying up late. Like, we don't have those symptoms. Another question I would ask to determine if it's harmful is, do the kids, are they able to distinguish between fantasy and reality? Like, do they know that this is fake? And do they know that these bad guys aren't gonna be able to get them? And that's where I think maybe Rainier at the age of 2 or 3 with these zombie-like characters, I think it was like so scary that it crossed that line into real life a little bit.
But I didn't see that with Filia, so I think she was at a level of maturity that she knew these didn't actually exist in real life.
Kids are so smart. You know, I think they know most of the time that it's like, it's a movie, that what you see on there is not the way the world always works or is depicted. Like, it is a depiction of a situation.
Another question we ask is awareness to an idea or action harmful to them?
Like, just the actual awareness of it. I think that the logic goes, divorce is bad, rape is bad. So if you hide our kids from knowing those things, like, they can't handle it.
As long as possible, then that's better, because when they're 18 versus when they're 5, they can better handle that reality.
Or maybe they'll get like so scared. I just haven't seen this, and I don't really believe this. We've exposed our kids to all sorts of reality at a very early age, and let their interest level kind of determine if they want to not be exposed to it, or if they want to ask further questions, or if they just ignore it altogether. And what I've found with like our younger kids, they could watch some of the sex or rape scenes or violent scenes, and I don't even think it really hits them the same way we do. Like, they don't even like really know. They see people, they see bodies, like concepts like love and abuse are, you know, they see that the people are sad, maybe.
I think a lot of why I have a trouble watching a rape scene is actually because of my own baggage. I mean, I do think that it's disturbing as hell, like just in general. But a lot of why I can't handle it very well is because I've been hurt by men in my past. Now, our kids, like, they don't have, hopefully, that kind of baggage yet, to where they are seeing that on film, and then they're able to, like, they internalize it for their own reality.
And finally, the last question we ask is, are the kids replicating actions or ideas that are dangerous to them? So are they watching rape scenes and they want to go be sexually violent? Or they're watching like sword fighting scenes and our kids go and like start hitting other kids because now they think it's okay. And once again, we haven't seen this much at all. The closest I can get is Rainier, our 3-year-old, who watches some cartoon on YouTube called like Pajama Heroes or something.
PJ Masks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He like puts his arm out, he goes like, PJ Masks, and then he like goes. That's the level at which he replicates things.
Yeah.
But our teenagers...
Super muscles or something like that. Yeah.
Our teenagers aren't out there just like copying what they see. It's not like a one-to-one correlation. So these questions, I guess there's 5 of them, these are the criteria that we have, at least right now, and I think somewhat historically, asked about any piece of media as we're exposing it to especially the children that I guess we're making the decisions for them, like what to put on. And we do it all the time. I just think our meter has changed. I think early on as parents, I was afraid of a lot of things. I was like, oh, our kids are gonna be emotionally scarred. They're gonna like replicate all these things that they see. Really, I think it was probably like I was more uncomfortable with those things and uncomfortable with my kids seeing them than actually it doing damage to the kids. I think we need to be really like honest and fair about why we're doing what we're doing and not just say it's for the kids like benefit and health if it actually doesn't affect their benefit and health. And I haven't seen studies of like kids that watch Game of Thrones are more likely to go to jail or commit rape or get a divorce, or I don't know what the things would be.
Yeah.
I just don't see that.
Lori commented, the girls keep saying that their mom and dad wanted them to watch it. For what purpose? What can be gained from watching Game of Thrones? It is just baffling, especially letting a 12-year-old, an 8-year-old, and 3-year-old watch it. I mean, there can be absolutely zero value to letting Rainier or Filia watch that show.
So I guess you're kind of asking a question and then you're kind of also making an absolute statement here. But let's go with the question and take it at face value and answer, like, what value did we see in doing this together as a family? Game of Thrones is one of the highest rated shows in television history right now. It's ranked number 6 of all time on IMDb, for whatever that's worth. But a lot of people think it's like a really well put together piece of art. So yes, it does have violence and rape and
torture,
nudity, but that's not all it is. It's a very compelling story with very compelling characters and very compelling themes, and it is highly discussed and appreciated in our culture and our time. For those of you that don't know what Game of Thrones is or was. We're gonna share a few things that we think are values of watching shows together in general. This actually isn't specific at all to Game of Thrones, but it's the same mindset that we use in order to determine why we should watch it together, or at least some benefits. To us, togetherness is more important than appropriateness. In our culture, we have all sorts of activities sliced and diced up into kids' activities and adult activities. And some activities are appropriate for adults, and some activities are appropriate to kids. When I was a lot more active in business, I was really surprised how when I took my kids to business meetings with me, how beneficial it was for their learning and our relationship. Even though business meetings with adults talking about spreadsheets and voting and hiring and firing, it doesn't seem to a lot of people like that would be appropriate for kids, but we found that it was actually really beneficial for our relationship and for our education for our kids. And finally, I'll just give one last example. When Seven and I ran our first marathon together, and I ran a marathon with a few other kids, I remember at the very end, you and some of the kids crossed the finish line with us. In a way, it like wasn't appropriate. Like, it wasn't against the rules, but you guys didn't run the actual marathon, so you didn't need to finish or cross the finish line. But it was this kind of like symbol that I remember like stood really strongly in my mind, and I just thought it was like really cool that you guys like joined us because you had really supported us along the way.
Another value is a common culture creates common conversations. Ben and I had already watched Game of Thrones a couple times. We knew if we brought everyone in on it, if they, you know, chose to do it, then it would actually create this culture in our house where we can actually all talk about it. And I think that's really valuable versus only him and I talking about it.
Yeah, it's really weird if we go off to the bedroom at night and watch Game of Thrones, which is a 70 or 80 hour investment, and it's like our favorite show, but yet we're not able to share it with our kids, even though it's like not harmful to them or like just kind of for no good reason. And on the flip side, it was really cool to have the thing that we were really excited about, to be able to share that with the people that are really the closest to us, and we want to be the closest with. And I think it paves the way for when they experience art that they enjoy, instead of just like keeping it to themselves or their teenage culture, they, I think, are more likely to bring us in and say like, hey, I want to share this with you. And we're able to decide if we want to be a part of that also. The next thing is our family and marriage can handle difficult topics. From the very beginning, we've decided that we don't want to create taboo topics or words or ideas where things are off limits to be discussed and dialogued about. You know, this was not the first time our kids have been exposed to sex. We've been through like extensive sex education with them, and we have a whole bunch of other videos about that. This is not the first time they've been exposed to violence. In fact, the violence was the main reason why I wanted them to watch it. Because what I feel like Game of Thrones does better than any show I've seen is it shows the actual cost of violence and how dangerous it actually is.
And the emptiness of it, how it's actually not very long-term satisfying to be violent.
So in that way, I actually think it's a really amazing piece of art. So if I have the choice of coming up against a hard topic where it's going to be awkward or weird or make people stretch or grow, and stopping and running the other way, or kind of like heading into it together and saying, hey, this is going to be hard, this is going to be weird, like, are you guys up for it? Let's talk about it. As a family, I think we've more embraced that option.
Next value is we are a safe place to discuss sex and violence. We want our family culture to be a place where you can discuss those things that are actually more taboo in society. I think oftentimes when family is not a safe place for that, then kids find other places to be able to discuss those things or to be able to process those things that either they see in media or they see in real life.
Yeah, they talk about it online, they talk about it with their friends, and all of that is great. I just want to provide a place where our kids have the option to talk about it with us if they want. What happened with Game of Thrones specifically was a lot of the conversations that happened after we started watching it, like we found ourselves talking about all these things and like, oh, what did you think about that relationship they had? Or what did you think about that character who was highly, you know, sexual or promiscuous or violent? We're not afraid of those things because I think the desire that is in any person that is sexual and the violence, it's kind of like all inside of us. And when we talk about characters on a screen, we're really like talking about ourselves.
It's actually a safer way to talk about yourself because you're, you know, able to talk about, well, this other person did this. Oftentimes it's very hard to talk about what's actually going on inside of you, but this is kind of a bridge to that.
The next benefit we've noticed about watching movies with our kids is that it removes the allure. Media and sex and violence, I think, can take this role that's like larger than life, especially when it's prohibited. So I know for me, like when I found out there was like such thing as an R-rated movie, or that I wasn't allowed to watch this movie or this scene, like it made me way more interested than I probably would have been had I just been able to watch it with my parents and then be like, okay, this is a little bit weird. But I think sometimes when we create these barriers, they actually give more power to the thing that we're trying to help our kids overcome. Like sex, I don't think is as big of a deal to our kids as it was to me growing up, in a good way. And violence, I remember, I'll never forget this scene where I was at my friend's house and we were probably like 5 or 6, and it was like this black and white cowboy movie. And the one cowboy was gonna like shoot the other cowboy at the end. And the dad goes up and turns it off, like for that scene. And it was like, you know, he didn't want us to see like a fake death or violence. And it was like, I mean, I don't know, it's just so funny, you know?
Being exposed some to sex and sexuality and violence, it becomes more this like natural thing or consequence or whatever byproduct of being human versus this larger than life thing inside of me and inside of this other person. The last value we see is it models for kids how to engage with entertainment. You don't just check out or replicate what you see.
I think it's cool for our kids to watch us watch this violent movie and then be okay with discussing it and engaging with it. And we're not just using movies as kind of like a drug to escape our lives. And we're also not copying everything that we see on screen or creating heroes out of characters when really no character should be a true hero. We're like, you know, using our brains to incorporate these stories into our lives and process them. It changes us in a way, but not as a one-to-one correlation. And what I especially like about this is I think this starts at a very early age. Like sex education starts at the age of 3 or 4 as kids watch how adults deal with all sorts of sex, whether it be consent with just people about non-sexual things, or whether it be about any types of physical touch, or nudity, or what we're ashamed of or what we're not ashamed of. So even for our smaller kids, for them to just see that we're okay with nudity, I think that's actually part of our sex education for them. So the final point we're gonna make is, in general, I think our kids are gonna see stuff. I think our kids see more in this day and age with internet access and just friends, and actually maybe it's not even new now. I think our kids know more and see more than most parents, including ourselves, realize or are comfortable with. So the question really isn't so much, are they gonna see it? The question is how they're gonna see it. In our experience, one of the most dangerous things is actually isolation. That's more dangerous to us than, I don't know exactly what people are concerned about. I guess I could go back in time and, yeah, what exposure could cause to certain things. I think shame that comes from isolation, or like a desire from believing that something's really gonna be super awesome even though that's a fantasy or fiction. Those are things that we don't deal with when we talk about stories in community. So we kind of err on that side, and part of that has to do with our story. So one of the questions I would ask you guys, and I'm gonna answer it myself, is for you yourself watching this video, when you were a child, do you wish that your parents had shared more with you or less? I know for myself, I wish my parents had shared more. I was pretty sheltered from a lot of these things from their perspective, and I would have much rather watched movies or been exposed to content with them. Now, I know at a certain point it's awkward, but I think it's mostly awkward because it's never been done before. Sex has become this awkward thing to be like, well, I don't want to know that my parents have sex, but I think we're conditioned into that. I don't think that's a natural state of things. This is just our experience. These are our opinions. These are our values. And at the end of the day, we're changing all the time.
Parenting's always an experiment, I think. I mean, you never have the same person that you're parenting. You never have the same time in society. So it's all a giant experiment.
And much more important to me than my perspective on movies or Game of Thrones or entertainment is, I think, the fact that I want to be 100% open to apologizing to my kids in the future if I change my mind, or if they come to me and say, hey, we didn't like this, or we thought that was harmful. I'm not going to defend this then. I think that's the most powerful weapon we can have at our disposal, so that all we can do right now is the best we can with what we got and what we believe. And this is very honestly... What?
He said this is the most powerful weapon.
Tool? Weapon
maybe?
Against isolation.
Oh, that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think there's a lot of parents that, regardless of where they stand, they don't want to apologize to their kids. They're like, no, I did the best I could. Yeah. I'm right. I don't have to.
And I actually believe that that does way more damage than any exposure that you might have in media. To not be able to come to your parents and for them not to basically validate your feelings.
Okay, we got one last comment we're reading here. I wanted to end it on a positive note.
Evening commented, my parents never shielded me from the movies, TV they watch, and never regulated what I decided to watch. They got a lot of heartache from family and friends about it, but I think this only benefited me as someone who, like everyone, would eventually have no supervision. I remember feeling like other people underestimated my ability to understand difficult topics and wanted to shield me from feelings and thoughts I was already experiencing. I felt like my parents trusted me and my decisions. It allowed me to make up my own mind on what I wanted to see. I didn't feel like I had to sneak around to watch a popular movie my friends were watching. If I felt something was too much for me, I wouldn't watch it, or I'd talk to my parents about it. Being sheltered from an adult thing doesn't help someone gain a healthy relationship with it. This just demonizes it. Experience is how people grow, and everyone grows differently.
Maybe we should have just read that comment instead of doing all this talking. I feel like that's
this is
like
our response.
That's exactly what I like wanted to say, but she said it like in
really beautifully.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing
I'm
this.
assuming this is a girl. Sorry if it's not.
And thank you to everyone that left comments and feedback. It really helps with the conversation, and I think people that left comments are probably representing a lot of other people that are wondering similar things.
Yeah, we're not trying to demonize anyone's comment. To us, we just want to use it to promote more conversation.
So there's a couple ways this conversation can happen. One is in the YouTube comments below. I would love to see you guys' thoughts on how do you decide what's dangerous for your kids to watch. And I want to actually get specific and talk about your personal experience. Like, have you seen danger or have you experienced danger yourself? Instead of just these blanket kind of like scary statements like, oh, that's dangerous. Or how have you experienced the benefit of the opposite, of exposing your kids and doing this together? The second place we can discuss this is we have a Facebook discussion group that's private, and the link to that is down below. So it's one of my favorite places to see this discussion. I think it works better than the comments and things. Either way, guys, I hope this was helpful and just gives you guys a conversation starter for home. See you guys next time.